Donald Trump is the next president of the United States of America. What's going on, land investors? My name is Luke Miller with My Simple Land. If you're here, welcome. We talk about buying and selling land here in Virginia and all over the country mostly, but we're sticking to the Virginia area. West Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, the Mid-Atlantic. That's my specialty. That's where I like to invest my money. But the things we're going to be talking about today are really universal. I would say they're almost across America, of course. We're not talking about land in other countries, but the things we're going to talk about, I think, will be applicable to most areas within the United States. And that is Donald Trump is going to be our next president. What does that mean for land prices? What does that mean for investors? What does that mean for sellers, buyers, brokers, everyone in between? And what does that mean? And we're going to get into that. But first, I want to talk about a couple things. All right, to start, I want to say that I'm not intending this to be an overly political video. Of course, obviously, we're talking about the president. It's going to be a political video. But I'm less inclined to talk about policies and more about general themes. And so to set the stage with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about Donald Trump and his background. Now, I've done a little bit of research. I know roughly what he's done and how he's going to approach things. But for people like you and me, we need to understand that he comes from a place of real estate investing. He has experience with this. This is how he made his money, of course. Everyone always likes to talk about Donald, the businessman, but, he got his start in real estate deals. And so having someone in the White House who understands real estate investing, frankly, whether you like him or not, is a good thing for real estate investors in general. Now, that could be differing on certain policies, of course, but in general, I'd say it's a good thing. Now, last time he was in office, I personally believe it was a good thing for real estate investing. We had several things like the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which talked about bonus depreciation and changes to what accredited investors can invest in. And things like that are opening up new avenues for folks. Of course, it's if I was on the other side, it might be, these are loopholes that he's opening for his wealthy friends. Well, you're probably right. He's obviously incentivized to make money, but that doesn't mean we can't make money right alongside with him. And so we're going to talk about a couple main points today about what this means for real estate investors. And we're going to start with number one. And of course, that's tax policies. Now, Trump has campaigned on tax policy a little bit here and there, sprinkled in. Of course, you heard about no taxing tips. So he's not going to tax restaurant, he said he's not going to tax restaurant workers on their tips. But traditionally, he has supported tax cuts. And that's a very good thing for real estate investors. Both if you're selling a piece of land and you make a bunch of money, you want to pay less tax on that. Or if you're buying property, you want to be able to maximize what you can afford by taking advantage of things like the 1031 exchange, which he has traditionally supported, but also things like just maximizing how much you can afford and keeping more of your money. That's a big thing that people are very excited about. And then personally, that's one of the things I'm most excited about is the potential to reduce some of the taxes you pay on things so that your affordability can be greater and you can have more money to widely invest. All right, point number two, which I think kind of goes along with this, but that is about interest rates. Now, this is a big deal, and some of it he can control, some of it he can't control. Obviously, the president cannot wave a magic wand and say, all right, I want interest rates low for the remainder of my term. Now, that also doesn't mean that he doesn't have any impact at all. I think there are folks that would want to say he has absolutely no influence on the Federal Reserve and what the Fed rate is set at. I think that's ridiculous. I think political pressure, consumer sentiment plays a huge role in this. And so as long as people are feeling better, inflation's going down, and he can exert some sort of pressure, I think he's going to try and keep rates low. Now, that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing, that some people might say that's artificially holding up the economy, and I personally would agree with that. But at the same time, we want interest rates low so that we can spur buying. And I think that's ultimately what people want. That's what people feel comfortable with. But we have had a very long road of having low interest rates, and we might need to pay the piper, so it were, and go through some economic hardship to get to that point. Interest rates have been on the rise for the last 2 years, with periodic lowering here and there. And I personally don't see that going down anytime soon. I think we'll see potentially a gradual decrease. But there are very few examples in history where the Fed has gradually reduced interest rates. I think usually it's an emergency cut, or it's a very swift cut when it does cut interest rates, because it's a reaction to what happened previously. So I thought it was going to happen earlier this year, when we had that almost burp in the economy and there was a temporary drop in the stock market, but it sure rallied. And speaking of which, the stock market did rally on news that Trump was going to be the next president. And I think that bodes well for the economy. But it's almost as if there might not be enough legs left in the economy to be propped up. And so we might see a correction either way. And so to summarize, you might need to wait a little bit longer to see those lower rates until we can get inflation under control, until we can get spending under control. I think you're going to have a hard time. Plus, that does not take into account the black swan events, or potential meddling of folks that might not be so happy that Donald Trump is the next president. They might sort of kick out some of those artificial stilts that have been holding up the economy and force a correction, in which case that might result in some lower rates, but it might not translate to increased real estate demand or market transactions. All right, so our next point is going to be a little bit different, and that is the foreign investors' impact on land values. Now, if you talk to a lot of the sellers of real estate or potential sellers of real estate like I do, you will quickly hear a theme of, I don't want to sell my land to China. Are you Chinese? Are you a foreign-backed company? Are you a foreigner trying to buy my land for dirt cheap? And I think some people might look at that and say, oh, that's so frustrating that they wouldn't want to do business with someone of foreign descent. I look at it as though they're getting hit up for folks that might be trying to buy their land and sweep it up. As a real estate investor, I see those foreign-backed companies as competition that I frankly just can't compete with. They're overpaying for property. They're buying up tons of it. And so why I think this might be a point we need to look at with a Trump presidency is, I could see that going either way. One, I could see him completely ignoring this and just kind of letting bygones be bygones and not changing anything in this. But another part of me might see him sort of creating some sort of policy that limits the amount of land, especially raw land, that either companies can buy or foreign governments could buy. I would personally like to see something about corporations not being able to own so much land. But at the same time, I'm also a free market capitalist, and I don't like to see regulations like that. But I think the point of this, where you stand on this, is really irrelevant, because I think Trump will probably acquiesce to some sort of consumer demand if there is enough of it. So if enough people are vocal about this, I think he will have to address it one way or another, and I'm not sure what that will be. But I do think it's something to pay attention to. All right, another thing that I think we need to be paying attention to is the affordability of housing. I think this is something a lot of people in my generation, especially we're talking Gen X, millennials, but definitely Gen Z, as we're coming up, we're starting to realize how unaffordable some areas are. And I think that's something that's going to come to a head. And where I see that intersecting with land is, a lot of people are leaving cities to go buy land. And so we might see some sort of economic stimulus for folks that want to move out of cities and buy land. We might see something that is like a first-time grant or farm loans or some sort of incentive for folks to buy property where they might be able to homestead or or grow timber crops or farm, things like that, that I think might be a huge policy. And the reason I think this made my list is, and this is on X, so I don't know how accurate this is, but Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky has potentially been slated to run the Department of Agriculture. And I don't know how accurate these rumors are. Obviously, we have to wait at least a month until we start seeing some of these appointments. But this was first leaked that he's being considered by Joe Salatin. And if you have any sort of I guess if you're around the circles of homesteading and Virginia farmland and Homesteaders of America, you know who this man is. But if you don't, if you have no idea who Joel Salatin is, he runs a regenerative farm here in Virginia called Polyface Farms, I believe is what it's called. And he is just an incredible guy, first of all. But he really has made it his life's mission to help people get into homesteading, but getting into homesteading in the right way, using regenerative farming and traditional farming techniques and things that really help. Personally, it's a huge passion of mine because it helps the soil, it helps the farmland, it really respects the animals that you're raising. And so I could see that being a huge priority for him and for Congressman Massie to be some sort of, escape the cities, get some farmland. And so I could see some sort of grants come out of this that might be a big thing for land investors. And so that's definitely something we got to pay attention to and stay on top of. And of course, if you're subscribed to these videos, I'm going to be keeping an eye on it. So the easy button for you is just hit that subscribe and I will make sure we put a video out if I do see any movement like that. This is going to be something I'm tracking, so make sure to pay attention to that. All right, one of the final things that I want to talk about is trade policy. And you might be thinking like, wow, what does foreign trade have to do with land? And I will say that I think it could impact it a lot. Trump has talked about how he's going to change some of the tax policy like we talked about earlier, but he might be implementing more tariffs. Now, tariffs, if you're not familiar, go research what tariffs are. But essentially, it has the potential to make building costs more expensive. Now, if I was running the Trump campaign, I wouldn't say it's going to be more expensive because I would say there's going to be offsets that you will have more money in your pocket to pay more money for the tariffs. And it might just be a wash or potentially benefit you. But we can't escape the fact that tariffs could potentially make building materials more expensive. So if you're looking at buying a piece of land and building on it in the future, there's a chance it could be a higher construction cost. Now, personally, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal if you do notice a difference at all. But that being said, it's something we need to pay attention to because this has been a big part of his campaign is this tariff idea. Now, I think where that will manifest differently is consumer goods from China. I mean, I really do think that's where this was directly aimed at. Anything being imported over will probably potentially be more expensive. Now, you might be hearing that and saying that's a good thing. American products being built here, manufactured here. We could have a resurgence of manufacturing in the country. I'm all for it, but it could also mean expendable goods from China are more expensive. So it is something to pay attention to. All right, and the final thing, I'm giving you one bonus thing. I know I said final earlier, but I'm giving you one bonus thing to pay attention to, and that's really just the market volatility and investor sentiment that we're going to see over the next couple months. I think if it's anything like last time, they're going to do as much as they possibly can to make sure Trump has a very difficult presidency. But since he claimed the House and the Senate, it's going to be a little bit less of a volatile situation. It just comes down to what his policies are going to be. And so I think investor sentiment is at a high right now, post-election. We're 2 days past the election, but that could wane and you could start to see some uncertainty creep back in. I've talked to a lot of sellers of land lately, and a lot of them were waiting until they knew what the outcome of the election would be to make a decision if they wanted to sell or keep their land. And I think you'll start to see that as well. But I think maybe next year around this time, things will really start to calm down. You'll start to see some normalcy coming back. And I don't think it'll be quite as dramatic as a lot of people think it will be. But Still, investor sentiment is always number one, whether you're buying or selling, it plays into it at all, especially with rates. So it's something we got to keep an eye on. So in conclusion, a Trump presidency might be a good thing. For some parts of real estate investing, it might be a bad thing for other parts, but it will be a mixed bag for sure. And if it's anything like last time, it'll at least be entertaining to watch. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate making it this far. I've put a lot of effort into these videos. So if you really enjoyed them, definitely subscribe, definitely click that like button. I appreciate it. But like I said, I will be keeping an eye on all of this stuff. So if you want the latest in investment news, land, investment news surrounding land, buying, selling land, especially here in Virginia in the Mid-Atlantic, make sure to hit the subscribe button and I will put out videos regularly on this. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Bye.